I begin, as I always do, by welcoming everybody to our open hearings. But I have two things to say to start with, which will be familiar. Anyone in the room may use a mobile electronic device to transmit silently to the outside world what has been seen and heard in the inquiry, but only 10 minutes after the event which is being described. 10 minutes must be elapsed so that the delay on the video stream via YouTube is not interfered with. You may not use any electronic device for recording proceedings or taking photographs. As you entered today, you were required to agree to an order restricting onward transmission or communication of information set out in the annex, which you were shown on entry to the hearing room. This information will not be published in the hearing transcript and will not be transmitted via the YouTube stream. If inadvertently in the course of today's proceedings the name is mentioned, then we will have to pause proceedings. If you don't know what is required of you or have any concerns about it or any questions about it, please ask a member of the inquiry team to help you understand what is required. The YouTube stream is going to be replaced during part of today's proceedings by a Zoom call that's necessary to permit the order that I've just referred to, protecting the name of the individual, to be given effect to. Yes, now I think we can now begin.
Sir, this is the summary for the undercover officer known as Stephen Scutt. HN95, real name Stephen Scutt, lives abroad. He declined to give evidence to the inquiry and has not provided a witness statement. As a result, this summary is compiled from the contemporaneous documentary record of Scutt's deployment and its aftermath. Unlike most of his SDS contemporaries, Stephen Scutt did not use a deceased child's identity. He was adopted as a baby and instead used his birth name, which was Stefan Walenti Wesolowski, an actual date of birth for his SDS cover identity, which details appeared on his cover driving licence, along with the address of his then manager, D.I. Michael Barber. Stephen Scutt joined the SDS in October 1985, and by December 1985 appears to have deployed into the Socialist Workers' Party in Hackney, a targeting decision influenced by the security service. The first report obtained by the inquiry attributable to Scutt is dated the 6th of December 1985 and concerns a public meeting held by the Hackney North branch of the SWP on how to smash racism. The main speaker, Paul Holborough, who Scutt describes as, quote, an articulate and mildly amusing orator, end quote, covers the history of racism in the UK with, quote, particular emphasis on the blatant racism that, he feels, pervades the police service, end quote. The first report from Scutt obtained by the inquiry on the then recently formed Hackney South branch, into which he deployed, is dated the 21st of January 1985. Whilst the theme of the meeting was reported to be, quote, the crisis in European democracy, end quote, Scutt gleans from it information relating to the then current teachers' pay dispute, such as the relatively high number of teachers amongst branch members, plans for strike action, a march by local teachers, and a lobby of Parliament. A number of Scutt's early reports concern the Wapping dispute. He is the likely source of information, phoned in to SDS managers, which they too relay by phone, on SWP involvement in forthcoming pickets at the printworks. In a message dated the 14th of February 1986, for example, D.I. Barber notifies Commander Ops that the SWP Central Committee has ordered an all-London call-out of party members to support the mass picket at Wapping on the 15th of February 1986. That picket is the subject of a report by Scutt dated the 18th of February 1986, in which he records that approximately 1,100 supporters of the Socialist Workers' Student Society boosted attendee numbers, and that SWP members were instructed, by whom it's not entirely clear, to pull down crowd control barriers. In a passage underlined for emphasis, he reports that, quote, a particularly vicious group of anarchists had vowed the following week to return with ball bearings and scissors to sabotage mounted officers. A Scott report dated the 5th of March 1986 refers to an individual present at the picket of the 22nd of February and at that of the 1st of March 1986, who was said to have boasted of throwing a thunder flash at a police horse and declared his intention to do so again at a forthcoming picket. Scott reports that he obtained the thunder flash from the individual, quote, without arousing his suspicion, end quote, but provides no detail on how this was achieved. A separate report from Scott on the Wapping demonstration of the 15th of March describes it as violent and records that, quote, spontaneous action, end quote, led to the demolition of the perimeter fence. He reports that an SWP member before the demonstration advised SWP attendees that whilst they themselves should not be provocative, they should, quote, be ready to act and encourage others to do likewise. The inquiry holds no reporting from Scott on the Wapping action from April 1986 onwards, which seems to correspond to an alleged waning of SWP involvement in it. A security service note for file, dated the 23rd of February 1987, on a meeting with Scott, records his having stated that the SWP in May 1986 took a central decision to limit its routine activities at Wapping to the deployment of 6 paper sellers on a branch rota. It notes that he ascribes this change in approach to the unfriendly attitude of the print unions and the party's realisation that the print workers were unlikely to prevail, which sapped members' morale. A number of Scott's reports concern the SWP's stance on and role in various industrial disputes. In one such report, dated the 27th of March 1986, and in a security service note of a meeting held on the 13th of February 1987, Scott sets out SWP strategy in respect of potential strike action from London bus workers, the Inner London Teachers Association, and purported efforts by the SWP to urge the Civil and Public Services Association to a short-term strike in February 1987. 2 substantive reports from the latter part of Scott's deployment revisit this topic. One dated the 9th of February 1988 analyses the SWP's role in a number of ongoing industrial disputes, including Ford's in Dagenham and in the NHS, and describes the group, quote, taking heart from the high level of militancy recently displayed by various sections of the working class and trade unions, end quote. Another report from February 1988 appears to distill the contents of an SWP circular issued to party members to provide, quote, a clear and informed lead to its members regarding the current industrial climate, end quote, and presents the SWP stance on 3, quote, current disputes. In a report on the SWP's activities at a demonstration in Trafalgar Square on the 19th of April 1986, organised by CND, Scott describes the SWP participating in disorder. He claims that of the 200 SWP members present, half were involved in the, quote, disorder in Oxford Street, end quote, which followed the main demonstration. Scott reports that when protesters sat down on Oxford Street, the police deployed buses and police on foot to move them on. Whilst most demonstrators, he claims, were willing to give up when faced with these tactics, the SWP, quote, were not so inclined, end quote, and utilised the more, quote, passive protesters as fodder, end quote, and, quote, organised the collection of missiles to throw at police, end quote. In contrast, a report dated the 9th of February 1988 on a demonstration in support of strike action from the NHS workers records that, quote, the SWP had very few supporters involved in the subsequent disorder. Of the many reports from Scott concerning the SWP rallies at Skegness in 1986 and 1987, most comprise lists of attendees, including children, infants and refugees, categorised by SWP branch, both London-based and regional. This intelligence was gratefully received. A security service note for file, dated the 7th of April 1986, records that a security service officer, quote, congratulated Waite on HN95's successful acquisition of the list of all those attending the SWP Skegness weekend, end quote. And the 1987 annual report for the SDS celebrates the, quote, excellent work of an SDS officer, end quote, i.e. Scott, who made it possible to provide Special Branch and the Security Service with a complete list of names of all 2,000 comrades at the rally, quote, a feat only achieved at considerable risk to the officer involved. Scutt's 1986 reporting contains positive assessments of large-scale SWP events. His substantive report on the 1986 Skegness rally records 2,000 attendees in a pervasive, buoyant and optimistic mood. And he reports on a successful Marxism 86 event with 4,500 registered attendees, and in which he praises the sheer size and professionalism of the SWP's organisational efforts. There is some reporting on SWP involvement in justice campaigns. A report dated the 13th of March 1987 describes the appointment to the Trevor Monaville Organising Committee of a member of Hackney South SWP. He reports that whilst Trevor Monaville's parents' primary objective for the campaign was that, quote, truth and justice should be ascertained by way of the relevant legal processes, the campaign was under pressure from, quote, various political and community groups to incorporate the events into a more general and fundamental campaign against police oppression, violence and racism, end quote, and that the SWP saw it as, quote, an obvious area for recruitment and contact. His reports include descriptions of women as having, quote, a plump build, quote, a pretty face, and men with a, quote, high-pitched voice and a, quote, effeminate walk and mannerisms. Some of HN95's reporting on the SWP was sent to DI HN354 Vincent Harvey. Scutt met security service officers regularly throughout his deployment to exchange information about the SWP. In one such meeting, held on the 30th of April 1986, the security service emphasised to him its interest in SWP members working in government departments and tasked him to keep an eye on developments regarding SWP's involvement in the East London area, such as campaigns against racism in schools, anti-fascist action, campaigns against the police, and activities in the Camden Local Authority. In another meeting, held on the 7th of July 1987, with DCI Docker present, the Security Service note for file records Scutt sharing his personal views on his target group, describing his SWP colleagues as boring and the women as, quote, ugly. Scutt, in September 1987, also provided to the Security Service detailed information about an SWP location. In other documents from March and April 1986 and July 1987, the Security Service lauded Scutt for his reporting and, quote, the range and depth of his knowledge, end quote, on the SWP. In addition to his local branch commitment, Scutt is reported in February 1987 to have worked as a van driver for the SWP print shop, and in February 1988 at the SWP Centre, quote, when possible, end quote. A note for file from February 1987 indicates that Scutt was offered the chance to work at the SWP Centre full-time, an opportunity the Security Service were keen for him to take up. The note records that the DAC, to whom SDS managers escalated the matter, was against it, believing such a move would risk the security of the operation and SDS managers' capacity to control Scutt. The note makes it clear that both Scutt and the Security Service were disappointed by this decision. While Scutt's first DCI, Tony Waite, held him in high regard throughout his time in post, Docker's estimation of Scutt underwent a sharp and sudden decline. In Scutt's AQR of April 1987, Docker considers him to be a, quote, thoroughly sound and practical officer who is ideally suited to his present duty, where his qualities of initiative, self-discipline and experience are put to excellent use, end quote. A Security Service note of a meeting with DCI Docker on the 16th of September records that HN95 is said to have, quote, 2 years to go and continues to do very well, end quote. And a note on a meeting with DCI Docker and DIHM109 in March 1988 records that HN95 is, quote, continuing well, end quote. 1 month later, on the 20th of April 1988, DIHM109, who took over as SDS-DI in November 1987, in a negative AQR, assesses Scutt to have been, quote, operating at a minimum requirement level, end quote. Docker describes Scutt as a very private and very intelligent individual who constantly seeks to manipulate persons and situations to his own advantage, and comments that it is now perfectly clear that he is submitting what he considers to be a minimum return, which, over the last 6 months, has consisted mostly of lists of names and short reports on individuals. In his memo, DCI Docker writes that the AQR's finding renders Scott unfit for the SDS and that he will be transferred to another special branch squad with immediate effect. Around 2 weeks after his dismissal from the unit, Scott, on the 2nd of May 1988, had a meeting with Superintendent Anthony Evans in which he was encouraged to speak his mind, and which lasted for nearly 5 hours. Superintendent Evans' note of this meeting and Scott's written response to his AQR show him criticising SDS management for its failure, as he saw it, to raise with him, prior to his defenestration from the unit, their concerns about the quality of his work. The contemporaneous special branch paperwork suggests that the reasons set out in Docker's memo and Scott's AQR were not the only drivers of his dismissal. A security service note for file of a meeting with SDS managers DCI Gray and DI HM109 in November 1988, when Gray had taken over from Docker as SDS DCI, records further allegations that he lied about his army record and kept from managers that he cohabited in Norfolk with a partner and 3 young children. Concerning the first charge, Scott's application to join the Met states that his army career consisted of posting in the medical corps only, but he appears over time to have embellished his role, claiming in his application for special branch, dated the 1st of August 1979, to have, quote, gained experience in the army within the Royal Army Medical Corps and the Intelligence Corps, and elsewhere he claims to have, quote, controlled army sources in the Belfast area as a member of the Intelligence Corps, which statements are belied by the copy of his army record obtained at some point by DI HM109. Regarding the second charge, Scott's erstwhile managers disagree. In conflict with the claim recorded by the Security Service in November 1988 that Scott, quote, concealed from SDS management the fact that he had a common law wife and children, end quote, former DCI Waite attests that he knew Scott had a family in Norfolk. There is some evidence of a further serious allegation, emanating from former DI HM109, that Scott made false entries in his SDS rent book and claimed overtime to which he was not entitled, to which there is a single ambiguous reference in the contemporaneous documents. A Security Service note for file, dated the 16th of June 1988, reports DI HM109 stating that, quote, the issue came to a head in May of this year when evidence of possible criminal deceptions and fraud on the part of HN95 was discovered, end quote. HM109 elaborates on this allegation against Scott in his more recent accounts. The contemporaneous paperwork suggests that these additional claims may not have been disclosed to senior managers, nor to Scott himself. For example, Superintendent Evans, following his meeting with Scott in May 1988, infers that he sought in vain from HM109 greater clarity on the reasons for Scott's discharge. And the documents record that Scott on more than one occasion asked senior management whether there were reasons for his expulsion other than those he'd been given. In his minute of May 1988, concerning his 5-hour interview with Scott, Superintendent Evans provides his own view on the main reason for Scott's dismissal, remarking that, quote, whatever questions might be raised about Scott's work performance, the root of this problem is the breakdown of relationships between him and DI HN109. They are not complementary characters, end quote. The document suggests that Scott's dismissal divided the unit. While some officers welcomed it, others, including Bob Lambert, HN10, John Dines, HN5, and HN8, took Scott's side, requesting at short notice a meeting with Superintendent Evans, at which they asked for Scott to be given additional time to withdraw, and which may have contributed to Scott's deadline for withdrawal being extended twice, until the 13th of June 1988. Whilst Evans records that his meeting, quote, with the deputation has not created any visible problems for DI HM109, HM109 testifies that at a meeting in a pub with some of those same officers, as well as Scott, Bob Lambert pushed him against a wall, declaring that they would leave him alone only if he left, quote, Steph, end quote, alone. Robert Lambert, in his witness statement, denies that this happened. Other documents show that Scott's dismissal also divided special branch management. Former DCI Waite, who recruited Scott, remained supportive of him. HM109 will say that sometime after he'd served the negative AQR on Scott, Superintendent Evans arranged a meeting with HM109, at which he put pressure on him, resisted by HM109, to reinstate Scott as an SDS UCO. The documents describe Scott in the aftermath of his discharge from the SDS as visibly and openly distressed. Superintendent Evans described Scott at the outset of their post-AQR interview in May as, quote, looking grey and drawn, end quote, as appearing, quote, to be quite ill with worry and as clearly devastated, end quote. Scott is reported to have cried during a telephone conversation with DS Sutcliffe about his leaving the unit, and to have described himself to Commander Gunn as, quote, totally shattered, end quote, by events. In a minute dated the 20th of April 1988, Commander Gunn directs that, quote, we must, of course, pay close attention to his post-SDS counselling and any supervision/welfare matters that may arise. And after his meeting with Scott on the 16th of May 1988, recognises that, quote, we do have a potential welfare problem, end quote, and assesses Scott's present demeanour to warrant a recommendation to the Personnel and Training Department that he be, quote, removed from the list of authorised firearms officers. In the weeks that follow, things unravel further. A memo dated the 8th of June 1988 from acting DCI HM109, in the absence of DCI Docker, who was attending a course at Bramshill Policing College until the 13th of June 1988, reports that Scott has gone absent without leave, having failed to contact the office after he was seen last at an SDS meeting on the 6th of June, at which he is said to have apologised to DS Sutcliffe for crying during their call the previous day. It describes DS Lambert on the 7th of June contacting Scott's partner, who apparently seemed unconcerned by Scott's absence and, quote, spoke about the health of the children, end quote. Whilst HM109 in the memo concedes that, quote, there is no doubt the officer has been upset at his withdrawal from the SDS and could be described as having exhibited signs of depression, end quote, he suggests that this may be contrived. The documents chart the measures taken to locate Scott, which include dispatching DS Hyde, DS Bob Lambert, and a female detective to Scott's home in Norfolk, at which, according to a security service note of a meeting with HM109 on the 16th of June 1988, SDS officers said that unless HM95 surrendered himself by Monday the 6th of June, a warrant would be issued for his arrest. Other measures included advising the appointment of an independent investigating officer and setting in motion, quote, an official inquiry into Scott's conduct over the past week. The documents attest to Scott's reappearance days later. A police report dated the 22nd of June 1988 records that at 10:35 a.m. on the 12th of June, a member of the public reported a, quote, suspicious-looking man, end quote, lying on the benches in the precincts of York Cathedral. It reports that the attending officer, finding the man to be confused, depressed and uncooperative, took him to the police station, where he was searched, and Scott's negative AQR found on him, which led to his identification. The same police report records that at York Police Headquarters, Scott revealed to a DS and a chief superintendent that he was a member of the SDS and that his discharge from the unit had led to his becoming confused, depressed and going AWOL. He was then taken to police headquarters, where the author of the report and a female detective constable kept him under close supervision. Of Scott, the reporting officer writes, quote, it was clear that he was confused and had a persecution fixation against his inspector, who he blamed for his forthcoming move. The officer records that Scott then went on to disclose that, quote, he was a member of a squad of 6 officers whose brief was to infiltrate subversive groups. Scott himself had infiltrated the Wearies, a slang term for the Socialist Workers' Party, at the highest level, and was working in their central office with access to all records, end quote. He takes care to note that, quote, Scott spoke only of his work to myself and WDC privacy. Other officers were merely under the impression that he was an undercover officer and nothing further, end quote. He ends the report with an assurance that no copies of the report will be retained at York, quote, in view of the delicate and sensitive nature of Scott's work. North York's police then contacted Special Branch Reserve, who contacted Commander Gunn, who dispatched DCI HN337, the officer appointed to investigate Scott's disappearance, DS Dines, and a female detective to collect Scott. He was voluntarily admitted to the Met Police nursing home later that day. Following an assessment by a consultant psychiatrist at Hendon, Scott, on the 14th of June 1988, returned to his home in Norfolk. Concerned about Scott's mental state and declaring himself to be, quote, particularly exercised, end quote, on behalf of Scott's partner and his 3 young children, the 4 psychiatrists recommended to Commander Gunn that he have no contact with police officers, Scott have no contact with police officers, until he, the psychiatrist, considered him to be sufficiently fit. Notwithstanding this advice, Commander Gunn, in a minute dated the 14th of July 1988, writes that he considers the pressing operational need to assess damage limitation factors in light of Scott's disclosures to North York's police to override the medical concern for Scott, and obtains an MPS doctor's permission, in the absence of Scott's psychiatrist, who was on leave until September of that year, for Chief Inspector HN337 and the female detective to visit Scott at home. Gunn notes that, quote, I have emphasised that this conversation with Scott should not be in formal disciplinary mode, but rather take the form of a general conversation with the primary aim of winning Scott's confidence, end quote. On the 15th of July, Commander Gunn reports that when DCI HN337 rang Scott to arrange what appears to have been presented to him as a welfare visit, Scott flatly refused, a development which Gunn claims, quote, disturbs. In a minute dated the 19th of July 1988, DAC Felon reports that he and Commander Gunn have agreed that DCI HN337 and the female detective should pay Scott a visit unannounced. DCI HN337's note of this visit on the 22nd of July records that he questioned Scott, who he describes as surprised by the visit, and is still wearing the long hair and beard cultivated for his cover ID, about the nature and extent of his disclosures to the North Yorkshire Police and others. He notes that Scott at one point cried out, I don't know who or what I am now, and as the meeting ended, asserted that as the visit coincided with the absence of his psychiatrist, it would, quote, set his treatment back, end quote. DCI HN337 concludes his memo with the observation that, quote, he, i.e. Scott, will no doubt make the most of the occasion at his next appointment with Dr. Redacted, due on the 8th of September. On the 22nd of July 1988, Scott's managers were made aware that Norfolk Police held a suspect record on Scott, after that force inquired into whether a vehicle driven by Scott was an MPS vehicle. And on the 26th of July, DCS Parker went to review it. The record contains a number of entries reporting, amongst other things, that Scott had apparently revealed to people of interest to the police and convicted criminals with whom he was friendly that he was an MPS officer and worked undercover. Despite Special Branch Management's negative view of Scott, the documents attest to its reluctance to invoke the disciplinary process against him. Following Scott's period of absence without leave and the revelation of his disclosures to North York's police, a minute dated the 12th of July 1988 records Commander Gunn's view that disciplinary proceedings would achieve little, and that, quote, indeed, we have more to lose, end quote. In a minute dated the 3rd of August 1988, following the revelation of the suspect record, DCS Parker reasons that whilst he considers Scott conduct on his home turf to amount to a clear breach of discipline, the absence in the record of evidence of criminality and anything linking Scott to the SDS vitiates the need for disciplinary proceedings, adding that it would be difficult and complicated to establish the facts and would only expose the unit to unwelcome publicity, quote, which has been the very thing our actions have been aimed at preventing. Scott's psychiatrist, in a letter dated the 14th of July 1988 to the Met's chief medical officer, writes of Scott that, quote, he is quite deeply disturbed because of the way in which he believes he has been treated by senior officers in the branch, and that the manner of his withdrawal, quote, seems to be a calculated disgrace which hurt him very deeply. He continues, quote, above all, he has not wanted to see the officers whom he believes have subjected him to such insult and humiliation, end quote. Another document suggests that this psychiatrist attributed Scott's mental distress in part to an alter ego problem caused, it's inferred, by his SDS work, a similar diagnosis to that of T1 officer HN155. Docker, for example, in a security service note dated the 18th of July 1988, is said to have commented that the police psychiatrist appeared to be accepting his, i.e. Scott's, performance as genuine, and talked in terms of his needing to work out his alter ego problem. In contrast, the evidence suggests that the SDS and senior special branch management believed Scott to be faking his mental disturbance. A security service note for file, dated the 19th of July 1988, records DCI Docker to have claimed that Scott, quote, continued to feign mental instability as a result of his SDS work. Scott's account of his mistreatment by managers, as set out in his psychiatrist letter of the 14th of July, has been annotated by Commander Gunn, with comments such as, quote, untrue, nonsense, outrageous. The document suggests that Scott's managers also considered Scott to be feigning mental instability triggered by his SDS role as a ploy to secure him a large payout and medical discharge from the force, akin to that received by HM155. A security service note dated the 22nd of June 1988 records DCI Docker's claim that Scott was, quote, angling for a medical discharge, end quote. It was feared, it seems, that such an outcome might prove fatal to the SDS. A security service note for file, dated the 19th of July 1988, for example, records DCI Docker explaining that, quote, the feeling seemed to be, if any other SDS agent began playing up and seeking a medical discharge, the SDS would be folded up. In the weeks after Scott reappeared, senior special branch management liaised with those charged with his medical care. In a minute dated the 14th of June 1988, for example, Commander Gunn refers to a conversation he had that day with the consulting physician, in which he apprised him of a previous medical retirement and a grant of 30% injury award to an SDS officer diagnosed with a personality disorder arising from an alter ego problem brought on by his time in the SDS, and shared with him his concerns that alter ego might become an easy excuse for any SDS officer experiencing domestic and professional difficulties. In another minute of the same date, Gunn notes that he repeated these concerns to Scott's psychiatrist. A third minute, dated the 21st of July 1988, following Gunn's receipt and annotation of the letter from Scott's psychiatrist to the MPS chief medical officer, documents that he has, quote, arranged to see Dr. Redacted when he returns from leave in September to set the record straight, end quote. Documents show that Scott, in the end, received a diagnosis of a pre-existing personality disorder, which outcome eliminated his time in the SDS as a contributing factor, thereby ruling out a substantial injury award. On the 17th of October 1988, it was recommended by the MPS consulting physician that Scott, quote, be returned as medically unfit for further service with the force on the grounds of depression, end quote. The documents record a second and final meeting between Scott and DCI HN337 on the 22nd of November 1988, following confirmation of his medical retirement from the force. The meeting had the purpose of allowing Scott to sign his retirement papers. Documents indicate that at this meeting, Scott alleged to DCI HN337 that a fellow SDS officer had had an affair in their cover identity. Gunn, in a minute dated the 25th of November 1988, refers to this development obliquely thus, quote, other matters arising from the visit are dealt with in a separate report, end quote, which report appears no longer to exist. A further minute evidences that the officer accused by Scott and their partner were interviewed by DCI Martin Gray and DI HM109 that same day. But Martin Gray's report of that interview, referred to in a minute from Commander Gunn, in which he records that, quote, I have asked DCS Smith to expand upon the reasons for the assertions of DCI Gray in para 3 of his report at 1B, and, quote, I have also asked for more detail of redacted explanations to the allegations, is also missing from special branch records. Other documents show that the UCO and their partner were interviewed again on the 18th of January 1989, this time by DCI MacLeod. A branch note records his unqualified acceptance of the UCO's claim that Scutt's accusations were fuelled by resentment of the UCO's refusal to support Scutt in the wake of his discharge from the SDS. And he concludes that the allegation is, quote, nothing but a malicious smear. The documents show that some information concerning Scutt's dismissal from the SDS and his discharge from the force went up to Commanders Annesley and Howley, with the former directing that Scutt's medical retirement, quote, will need careful handling, and that, quote, the reasons for this course of action have been properly brought to Scutt's attention, end quote. A document dated the 14th of August 1989 shows that even the Director General of the Security Service was apprised of the episode. The Home Office, however, was deliberately kept in the dark. An approach to the SDS took steps to ensure the Security Service would not undermine. A Security Service note for file, dated the 1st of December 1988, on a meeting with DCI Martin Gray and DI HM109, records that, quote, the SDS consider this to be an internal matter only. They may decide to allude to it in their 1988 annual report, but were very exercised at the idea of the problem being brought to the immediate attention of the Home Office, end quote. It is further noted that, quote, F4 redacted in conversation assured them that we had no intention of saying anything to the Home Office. In the interests of good F4-SDS relations, they should not be pushed on the point, as they are extremely sensitive about it, end quote. A Security Service minute from the following day provides an update from the SDS, reporting that Scutt's diagnosis is that the cause of his mental instability predated his SDS work. Its author also emphasises the importance of retaining good relations with SDS in the interests of future intelligence gathering from an important source, and that with this in mind, quote, it might be wise not to mention SDS's internal difficulties to the Home Office. It is not impossible that the entire SDS operation could be closed down if there were sufficient political outcry against the background of current parliamentary debates, and that would be much to the disadvantage of our intelligence collection. It would in any event be for the police to judge what needs to be said to the Home Office, end quote. Not long after the Scutt debacle, but in ignorance of it, the Home Office decided that the unit was no longer required to seek yearly authorisation, and that its continuation was guaranteed on a rolling basis. In the immediate aftermath of the crisis, DCS Parker, on the 5th of July 1988, commissioned from DCI Docker, with some input from the heads of other special branch squads, a discussion paper on the SDS viability, its internal processes and procedures, its future strategy, and post-field supervision. As a result of this review, SDS recruitment procedures were tightened up, with SDS managers required to present to a panel of senior special branch managers a case for recruiting individual applicants, and to conduct a review of applicants' personal files. A note of a meeting with the Security Service on the 30th of November 1988 records that SDS managers, DCI Gray and DIHM 109, posited, with no evidence, that Scutt, quote, possibly with the connivance of his partner, end quote, was responsible for a UCO's compromise the previous year, about which incident Scutt notified managers. The documents also show management voicing concerns that an embittered Scutt would breach SDS security by revealing the location of safe houses and or through anonymous disclosures to members of officers' target groups. Preventative action included temporarily holding SDS meetings at managers' homes whilst new secure premises were found, and a reassessment and update of the SDS response to a security breach. Ultimately, these fears proved groundless, and Scutt's promise to DCI HN337 at their meeting on the 22nd of July 1988 that he would do nothing to jeopardise the safety of his fellow officers was borne out. So that concludes the summary for Stephen Scutt.
Thank you very much. I think there's one thing that can usefully be added to it, which is the sole reference to the departure of Scutt in the 1988 annual SDS report, where it says simply this, open quote, one detective constable retired from the Metropolitan Police through ill health, close quote.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, we can either break for 15 minutes to enable our transcribers to have their usual break, or we can continue with live evidence. Which would you prefer? To continue, yes. Then we'll continue with the live evidence of HN 90. So, I'll have to rise for a moment or two to permit everything to be set up for that to happen. Thank you.
swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the
the
truth,
whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Good morning. My name is John Warrington and I'm asking questions on behalf of the inquiry over the course of today. Now, you are the former Special Demonstration Squad undercover police officer known to the inquiry by the cipher HN90, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And for the benefit of those following today's proceedings, you'll be referred to as HN90 throughout questioning, as there is a restriction order in place that prohibits publication of your real name. You prepared a witness statement for the purpose of the inquiry, is that right?
Yes, that's correct, sir.
It's 74 pages long, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Dated the 13th of May 2022, is that right?
That's correct.
You've signed that statement, is that correct?
Yes,
Are the contents of your witness statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
they are.
HN90, that puts the whole of your witness statement into evidence, and if not already, it should appear on the inquiry's website in due course. Now, I just want to ask you, to begin with, a few questions about your early career. And I think it's right that you joined the Metropolitan Police Service in the early 1980s, is that right?
That's correct.
You spent some time as a uniformed officer and thereafter applied for and were selected for Special Branch, is that correct?
Correct.
You commenced with Special Branch as a probationer in the mid-1980s when you were assigned to C Squad, is that right?
Yes,
Please don't tell us what duties, but is it correct that you were then transferred onto different duties following your time on C Squad?
yes,
You eventually went into the Special Demonstration Squad back office in April 1988, is that correct?
correct.
And I think it's right that by that time you'd passed your sergeant's exam.
Around that time.
But is it also correct that you remained a detective constable when you went into the SDS back office?
That's correct.
Now, whilst you were on C Squad, did you receive intelligence reports?
Yes,
Were you aware of, whilst on C Squad, of a separate Special Branch unit that was obtaining and providing intelligence to Special Branch?
I became aware, yes.
How did you become aware?
I needed information, which a colleague of mine said, oh, well, I can help you with that. And then I was basically taken under that person's wing, as it were, and told how some information comes into our possession.
Did you have any knowledge of the unit before you were posted to C Squad?
No, none at all.
How useful did you find the intelligence that you were receiving?
Yes, it was of value, some of it more than others, obviously. But it was useful information, yes. Now
I want to ask you a little bit, HN90, about your selection for the SDS. And please be careful about names and fields of deployment that others were in at the relevant time. And be careful about avoiding specifying what duties you're undertaking for Special Branch at the time, all right? Now, can you remember how you came to be recruited by the SDS?
I had a casual conversation with a colleague. We were posted to the same office at that time, and a discussion between us took place around about the SDS and something of what it did. And that officer, who was my line manager, offered to put my name forward if I had an interest. And that was the first step.
Had that officer themselves been an SDS undercover officer?
Yes.
Were you interested?
Yes.
You say in your witness statement, for your assistance if you need it, page 3, paragraph 9, that you express a fascination for the work.
Yes.
Can you recollect what fascinated you about it?
I think I understood that unit was able to get information that wouldn't be able to be obtained through other sources.
Now, I think it's a few weeks after that you were called to a meeting. Is that right?
That's correct.
And again, being careful with names, I think it's right that the meeting was with Detective Chief Inspector Docker and a detective inspector that we know in the inquiry by the cipher HN 109. Is that right?
That's correct.
And can you remember if you attended that meeting?
Yes, I did.
Was anyone else present other than the three of you?
No.
Can you remember whether it was held at Metropolitan Police premises or on private premises or somewhere else?
Metropolitan Police premises.
Was it a formal or informal meeting?
It was formal in the sense that we were two officers sitting one side of the table and me on the other. Yes. But it wasn't a formal part of the selection process that I understood. It was more a conversation about me and about my wishes regarding the unit.
Just pause a moment, please. Were you informed during that meeting that you were being considered as a prospective candidate for the SDS?
I can't recall being informed, but my presence there obviously intimated that.
Did you understand that that's the reason that you were at the meeting?
Yes, very much so.
Now, for your benefit, if you need it, page 3 of your witness statement, paragraph 10, there you say that during that meeting you were asked how you would feel about spying on the lives of others. Do you recollect being asked that question?
Yes, I can't remember the exact words, obviously, but yes, I remember being asked that.
Did you answer?
Yes, I did.
What did you say?
I said that I believed that people had a right to protest, and I had no problem with that. However, because of the disorder that I had seen, I didn't believe that protesters had perhaps the right to impact so much on other people's lives. That's why I believe the police were doing a good job to try and mitigate the effect of that.
Do you remember whether during that meeting anything was said to you about the impact that an SDS deployment might have on you?
Yes, I remember.
Can you remember what you were told or advised?
It was the main thing revolved around the fact that I would have to cut off a lot of my social contacts and social activities as they were, and I would have to very carefully think about obviously protecting my cover, as it were, not exposing myself as a police officer.
Did cutting off social contacts and activities become a reality once you were deployed into the field?
Yes, it did, yes.
Sticking with that meeting, was anything said to you about any measures in place to ensure your welfare whilst you were deployed?
I don't recall any specifics, but again, it was. I think it was implied in the conversation that things would be in place to, should I have problems at any point.
At the same meeting, was anything said about any potential training for the role?
No, I don't recall anything being talked about regarding training.
Can you remember if any effort was made by your interviewers to ascertain your suitability for an undercover deployment at that initial meeting?
No, I don't recall anything being spoken about that.
Can you remember whether any effort was made by your interviewers at that meeting to ascertain your resilience with a view to undertaking an undercover role?
No, not specifically.
Can you remember at that meeting whether you were asked anything about your marital or relationship status?
Yes, I was asked what that was.
And I think it's correct that you were single at the time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Well, we'll move on to that topic in a little while. Now, following on from that meeting, what was the next thing that happened in respect of your recruitment into the SDS?
The meeting finished, and then some weeks later, I think it may have been, I got a telephone call, basically to say that from DCI DOCA that I had been seen as suitable for the unit, and that at some point we would talk about dates for actually moving from one area of work to another.
Does it follow from that that after that initial meeting you were in effect invited to join the unit?
Yes, that's the way.
In advance of joining the unit, did you ever have any sort of formal interview for the role?
No.
In advance of joining the unit, did you ever have any sort of formal assessment for the position?
Not a formal assessment, no.
Just going to ask that a document be brought up. It is MPS 0728960. So this is not in the hard copy bundle, but it's a document that you ought to have in loose leaf. Just wait for that document to come up, HN90. Thank you. Now, this document came into existence at about May 1989, and it's the SDS annual report for 1989. And that is the annual report that followed your recruitment into the SDS. Do you follow that?
Yes, I understand, yeah.
Could I ask that we go to page 8, please? And I want to look at paragraph 6 with you, which says this. Throughout the past 20 years, there's been a continual review of the functions and operations of SDS. during the past year, Commander Operations directed the Detective Chief Inspector to conduct a further review of SDS with particular reference to recruitment, operational deployment, and supervisory aspects. The selection procedure for field officers has not previously presented any problems in finding suitable special branch officers to fill the vacancies when they occur. However, the stressful and difficult nature of SDS field work made it necessary for the selection criteria to be re-examined to ensure that potential recruits are equipped psychologically and emotionally to cope with the pressures of this posting. Each SDS candidate is told that he will be retained on field duties subject to the following conditions. He is physically and mentally capable of performing the assigned duty, that he is working to the high standard required of SDS officers, and that the political area in which he is deployed warrants continued coverage. Did you consider your experience of being recruited into the SDS? In other words, as you've told us, conversation followed by a telephone call. Did you consider that as having undertaken a selection procedure?
Yes, I did consider that as a procedure as such, but not formal in the sense of application forms, etc. But I did consider when I was being selected that I was going through whatever process there was at the time for management.
Looking back, do you feel that the way in which you were recruited sufficiently tested or examined whether you were psychologically and emotionally suited to an undercover deployment?
I considered at the time that I was being obviously looked at and that people would be asking questions about me from people that had worked with me, etc. So as that was at the time, I thought that that was suitable at the time.
To be clear, however, you weren't assessed by a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a doctor or any
No,
like that?
no, I was not.
All right. Were the three conditions that are mentioned in the document, so physical and mental capability, high standards, availability of a political area warranting coverage, were they ever explained to you during your recruitment?
Not as three individual items there, but I think they were all frankly expected of me, and that would have come, that came about through that first meeting. But I didn't see it as the following conditions and then 1, 2, and 3.
Did anyone ever explain those three conditions to you in terms? This is what's required, this is what is expected?
No, I don't recall.
Were you asked questions by your recruiters to test your physical and mental capability or your standards? Can you remember if you were asked any sort of questions to test those attributes?
No, I can't remember any questioning on that.
Now, I think you have already told us that at the time of your recruitment, you weren't in a relationship. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yes or no answer to this question, please, HN90. Did there come a point when you entered into a relationship?
They did.
Was that before or after you joined the SDS?
Just after I joined.
And yes or no again, please. Did you eventually get married?
Yes.
And again, yes or no answer, please. Did you get married during the course of your deployment?
Yes, I did.
Now, you told us a little earlier that at that initial meeting you were asked about whether you were in a relationship. Did I understand you correctly?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
What was it explained to you at that initial meeting why your relationship status was important or of interest to your interviewers?
No, I don't recall that conversation.
Does it follow then that no explanation was given to you at that stage as to why your recruiters wanted to know whether you were single, married or whatever?
I do recall it around that time, but I don't think it was from that first meeting.
All right. Well, we'll get on to perhaps what happened later in due course. Just sticking with the initial meeting, was there any reaction from those interviewing you to the fact that you weren't in a relationship at that stage?
No reaction that I determined myself.
Once you entered into a relationship, did anyone from SDS management ever meet your partner with a view to assessing or reviewing your suitability for the SDS role?
I don't recall, no.
Did anyone from SDS management speak to your partner about the logistics or the demands of the role that you were about to embark on?
There may have been a conversation at social events, but no formal meeting took place with my then partner.
Did anyone offer, being careful about names, I ought to say, did anyone offer to speak to your partner about your SDS role?
Again, I don't know if it was from that first meeting, but very shortly after, I think the offer was made.
Can you remember, being careful about names, who offered to speak to your partner?
No, I don't.
Did you accept the offer?
No, I didn't.
Was there any reason that you didn't think it was necessary?
I just didn't think it was necessary.
Again, being careful about names, please, HN90. Was anything said to you about the significance of having a family life for being an SDS undercover officer?
Yes, during the course of my time in the back office.
Careful with names. Can you remember who spoke to you about that?
I think it was both at some point or another of the people who were at the first meeting.
So HN109 and DCI Docker.
Correct.
All right. Can you remember what was said?
Only in very general terms.
Tell us in general terms.
40 years later. It was that by having a family background, that provided, if you like, a base to which I would need to go back to, and that I wouldn't, if you like, go over to spend too much time. That is an incredible amount of time, and possibly even go and start to spend too much of my own time in the company of those I was deployed against. Oh.
Was there any other reason why the importance of family life was emphasised to you?
No, it was just around the the stability of my own deployment.
Was anything said to you about the potential to engage in relationships with those within the groups into which you were being deployed?
There were conversations quite early on when I was in the back office about not getting too close to those around me, so that they didn't start to have a call upon my day and my evening, my night. But at that stage, it was about general relationships and acquaintances. It was at that kind of level.
Just bear with me, please. Could I ask that we look at MPS 0731671? That's tab B4 of the hard copy bundle. Thank you. Just give me a moment, please. This is a special demonstration squad memo dated the 10th of October 1988. It's a confirmatory, it appears, memo of some recommendations that had previously been made by DCI DOCA in respect of STS recruitment and the operation, and dated, I think, about 6 months after you went into the STS back office. And I just want to draw your attention to paragraph B, please, which states that single officers will be considered as recruits only in wholly exceptional circumstances, and then only after prior discussion with the relevant squad chief superintendent and commander operations. Does it follow from that, HN 90, that the policy in relation to single candidates had changed following on from the time of your recruitment?
That's correct. That's my understanding, yes.
Being careful about names, and again, others' fields of deployment. And if there's any uncertainty about names, you can just write them down, all right? Are you aware as to whether there was a reason why the policy changed at that stage?
Yes, I am aware of the reasoning why.
Just take your time, HN90.
A problem had arisen regarding the deployment of Stefan Sanford Scutt. And as a result of the events that took place around that time, I understand that the policy then was brought in because of the problems that had arisen around that officer and his deployment.
And was that officer, did you know whether that officer was married or unmarried?
I understood him to be unmarried.
What was your understanding of the expression single? Did it mean unmarried, or did it mean not in a long-term relationship, or did it mean not in a relationship at all, or did it mean something else?
Single to me would have been unmarried.
Right. Thank you. Whilst you were in the STS back office and before you deployed, again, be careful about names, please. Did anyone in SDS management revisit the subject of your relationship or your marital status?
Yes.
Now, being careful about it, can you remember who looked again into your relationship status?
Well, I had an interview with Commander Operations.
And in broad terms, can you remember what that was all about?
He said along the lines that because of the problems that had arisen, he just needed to make sure I was the right person to go out into the field, to be deployed. And it went into, obviously, my relationship was one part of it, but also there was quite a bit of conversation where he was talking and to try and learn something more about me and my background.
So the conversation wasn't limited to just your relationship, is that?
No, it wasn't just limited to that.
Now, I think you told us earlier that you'd passed your sergeant's exam, and I think it's right that by September 1988 you're formally promoted to detective sergeant. Is that correct?
In September 1988, yes.
Was it usual to reach that rank in the time that you did?
Within that unit and within Special Branch generally, no, it wasn't.
Now, if it assists you, HN90, to refresh your memory, this is dealt with at page 5, paragraph 15 of your witness statement. And I just want to ask you about one thing you say there. Again, please, be careful about names, be careful about others' field of deployments. Now, you say your rapid promotion was an issue within the SDS, in particular with the undercover officers, and it made you feel even more of an outsider. Do you see that?
Yes, I do, yes.
Can you explain what you meant by the fact that your quick promotion made you feel like an outsider?
I think it was the norm that people that were on SDS had been in Special Branch for some period of time, whereas my time was relatively short and within Special Branch before going on to that unit. And the promotion I had got was while I was on SDS. So when I went out into the field, I think I may be in only a few weeks, and then I received a promotion.
Were you treated any differently by your colleagues as a result of being, to use your words, an outsider?
No, I wasn't treated differently because of it, but obviously it was a talking point amongst them that this was slightly unusual.
Positive talking point, negative talking point, something else?
No, just observational.
Did it give rise, this talking about your promotion, to any issue of concern to you?
No, it didn't. It was what it was.
All right, thank you. I just want to look into a little bit, please, the level of training that you did or didn't receive, all right? Was there a Special Branch way or house style for the drafting of intelligence reports?
Yes, there was.
Did you learn how to draft intelligence reports whilst on special branch but before joining the SDS?
That's correct, yeah.
When you joined the SDS, did you continue to write up reports in the same way, or were you to write them up differently?
The format was different to what I'd been used to. But generally, no, they were just expected to be, good grammatical English, conveying the information accurately and concisely.
Just want to take you, please, to your part of your witness statement, HN90, at page 27, paragraph 86, please. And I'm going to ask for this bit to be brought up on the screen. So this is MPS 0748094. And I think we need to go over the page. Thank you. Paragraph 86. And this is what you say about report writing in your witness statement. In general, I use the same approach to reporting in the SDS as I had done in mainstream Metropolitan Police Special Branch. I would only include in my drafts information that I believed might have value. And even then, I have vague memories of being told that some of my early reports contained tittle-tattle of no value. Ultimately, it was the DCI or DI who was signing off on behalf of the Chief Superintendent, so I accepted that they had editorial control. Now, does it follow from that your approach to writing reports whilst on the SDS was to report any information that you believed might have some value?
That's correct, yeah.
Being careful about names again, please. Can you remember who told you that some of your reports contained tittle-tattle?
I can't remember specifically, but I believe the sergeants of the day who were doing a lot of the drafting out of the reports of what I had written and putting them into a format, I received some feedback from them in the terms of that's not really very important. We could take that out.
So this is whilst you're on the SDS.
That's correct.
The back office sergeants would sometimes come back to you on your reporting and let you know when there was stuff of limited or no value within the report. Do I understand you correctly?
That's correct.
So by tittle-tattle, do you mean little or no value?
Yes, I think so. I think that was what I would mean.
Did you get consistent feedback throughout your deployment about the quality of your reporting?
Generally, yes, I did, yes.
Would feedback be formal or informal, or the combination of the two?
A combination of the two.
And when would this normally occur? Would it occur, for example, when you attended the bi-weekly meetings of SDS officers?
It occurred then, occasionally over the telephone, if I was in telephone contact.
And at what level were you receiving the feedback? Was it from DSs, DIs, DCIs, combination?
A combination of all of them, if necessary, but tended to be the DSs because they actually dealt with the hard copy paperwork, as it were.
Was feedback consistently positive or negative, or a combination of both?
I regard it as consistently positive.
Once you joined the Special Demonstration Squad, did you have any training or undertake any training specific to the role or specific to conducting undercover work?
No, no formal course or training.
Now, for your benefit, I think this is at page 6 of your witness statement, paragraph 18. No need to bring it up, but I think you say there that preparation for deployment took the form of guidance from both managers and undercover officers already in the field, which was provided through regular meetings. Do you see that?
Yes.
And by regular meetings, are you referring to the bi-weekly meetings?
Yes, those meetings, yeah.
Did those meetings include the, to quote you, round robins that you mention in your witness statement a little later?
Yes, that would include those as well as conversations with my managers and specifically the UCOs who I know might be more experienced than I.
So learning would come via round robins and conversations with individual or managers and contemporary officers. Is that fair?
Yes, fair.
Could you just explain how the round robins would operate? Was it a question of everybody going around the room and just updating everybody else as to what they'd been up to since you were all last together?
Very much that. What you'd been doing, what was coming up on your diary, as it were, and obviously your input around specific demonstrations, shall we say, and others would contribute to what you knew or would ask you questions for their own benefit. And sometimes, often, obviously, there were other people's deployments had an interest in what I was doing in my deployment.
Can you remember whether the issue of the potential for intimate relationships whilst in the field ever came up during those round robins?
No, I don't recall any occasion.
Can you remember whether that topic ever came up during the bi-weekly meetings when you were discussing things with managers or fellow undercover officers?
No. Early on, obviously I was getting a lot more attention from my managers to see how I was getting along, etc. There were conversations, I've already said, around how close acquaintances, should be, specifically to my deployment. But they were all sort of in, I would say the relationships were about my knowledge of the person, sociability, those kinds of areas. But there was nothing that got into any kind of intimate, that was the other side of planet Venus as far as I was concerned.
You talk, and you've told us a little bit already about the sort of thing that was said to you about private lives of others. But at page 8, paragraph 23 of your witness statement, for your reference, you talk about an implicit line in the sand being drawn. Do you see that expression? So paragraph 23 should be on page 8 of your witness statement.
Yeah.
What did you mean by a line in the sand?
Yeah, I just think you didn't get too close to people, that you started to get anything more than the acquaintance or the friendship, if that's the right word, that you were needed to do. And obviously, in terms of close, intimate relationships, that was just off limits as far as I was concerned. Bearing in mind as well, I obviously was in a relationship, not yet married at that time, and I wasn't going to sort of, I had an intimate relationship. There was no place for anything, at a work level.
Now, I know you've told us that this topic wasn't discussed in terms, but did you get the impression, given that you were spoken to about how you should conduct yourself with others, did you get the impression that your managers were alive to the risk of the possibility of a sexual encounter or relationship taking place?
Yes, I'm sure that they were, yes. Very much a risk to me.
For your benefit, at page 7 of your witness statement, paragraph 19, you mention in your witness statement that there was a loose leaf file of tips available where some officers would note down what they found useful. Do you see that?
Yes, yes.
Can you remember where that was kept? Was that kept at one of the flats or or at the back office?
I remember reading it in the back office.
Can you remember whether you consulted this file whilst preparing for your deployment?
Yes, very much so, yes.
Can you remember whether you consulted it during your deployment?
I don't believe I saw it after I'd been deployed to the field, no.
Can you, being careful about it please, HN90, but can you recollect any of the content? For example, did it address the use of a deceased child's identity, for example?
Yes, it did.
Did it address creating a legend or a cover identity?
Yes, it did.
Did it address the possibility of advances or relationships?
I don't recall seeing anything of that nature, no.
Did you find the file or the tips within the file to be useful?
Yes, I did.
Did you add to the folder at any stage?
I don't recall doing so, no.
Page 9 of your statement for your benefit, paragraph 28. I think you say that as a group you try to identify learning points. Do you see that?
Yes, yeah.
Now, the process of identifying learning points, was that something that occurred during the bi-weekly meetings?
I think it could arise at any time, really, whether it was casual conversations with people or a more open forum.
And when you say as a group, is that just the undercover officers, or did that extend to the management as well?
Management as well.
Can you remember if there was any formal process for recording any learning points that arose?
I don't recall any formal procedure to report, no.
Does it follow that what you're referring to are discussions?
They were discussions, really, yes.
And can you remember whether during these discussions the issue of sexual relationships, sexual advances was ever raised?
I don't recall any being raised, no.
Were you ever arrested in relation to any activity that you were involved in whilst you were deployed?
No, none.
Was anything said to you by your managers about whether it was permissible to engage in criminal conduct whilst you were deployed?
There were certain things that we just simply knew we had to break the law, and it was in my case, in my deployment, it was nearly always around fly posting.
All right, well, we'll come on to that a little later on. So typically in the field that you were in, fly posting was a risk, is that right?
Yes, it was. It was a risk.
And what were you told about how far you could go in relation to that activity?
Well, just simply that I would have to take part in that. In other words, everyone who was amongst my grouping, that was very much a bread and butter activity. And so it was accepted that I would go and I would fly post, and I would have, a brush in hand and paper in the other.
Was advice or guidance about criminal conduct whilst deployed, was that in relation to you limited to that issue of fly posting, or were you given any general advice?
No, I mean, all I remember was that, if you were going to go into areas of criminality, then that had to be discussed with the management to see what that was and the nature of it.
If you knew it was coming up, you'd have to discuss it with managers?
I would be expected to, yes.
And can you remember whether there were any occasions where you gave your managers advance warning of the fact that you were going to be out fly posting or anything like that?
Yes, I would always give them notice of that.
Were there times where you weren't able to give notice?
No, I don't. No.
If a situation arose where you were taken by surprise and felt you had to engage in that sort of activity, what would the practice have been as regards informing your managers after the event?
Well, just simply that I would have carried out the activity with the others, and then at the earliest opportunity would have said what I'd been doing and where.
Would that feature in an intelligence report, or would it just be you orally updating them? How would that work?
Well, I would put in a phone call to say, look, I've been out doing this and I've been doing that. That's it. It was just informing them what I'd been up to.
Can you remember what you were supposed to do if you were arrested?
The main thing really was not to disclose your true identity.
To maintain cover?
To maintain cover.
Was anything ever said to you about appearing in court in your cover identity?
No.
Does it follow that had you been arrested and charged with a criminal offence, let's say arising out of fly posting, you'd have had to have gone back to your superiors to discuss with them the next steps?
Exactly that, yes.
And is it, did I understand you correctly a little earlier? Did you engage in fly posting?
Yes, I did.
You said, did you say pot and brush in hand?
Basically, yes, brush in hand and paper in the other, and I was posting things up on,
I see.
Like,
Can you remember? Forgive me, I interrupted you. Sorry.
No, that's sorry.
Can you remember how often that that happened during your deployment?
Maybe once or twice a month. Sometimes it would be 3 or 4 times in a week because there was a particular large demonstration coming up in London, shall we say. Other times it would just be advertising meetings. It could come in fits and starts, I suppose.
Did you ever suggest putting up posters to members of groups that you were?
No, I didn't.
If, say, an event was, as you say, a major event was coming up and you were discussing it within a group in which you were deployed, was there a reason why you steered away from saying, well, let's fly post that, let's start a campaign so everyone gets to know about it?
No, there was no specific reason. It was more a case of I didn't need to suggest, because there were others who were, shall we say, had been members of the group and up to their activities for a considerable length of time, and they just simply stepped up and took the lead. So there wasn't any lack of volunteers to do it.
How did your managers react when you advised them that you were going out fly posting?
Well, it was just to be noted. That was it, really.
Were you given any advice or guidance as to how far you could go in relation to criminal activity?
I can't recall specific, but I think all of us as UC officers knew that there would be obviously different levels of criminality, and what I was engaged in was really very much a lower level, and I couldn't foresee getting into anything deeper at that stage. Had that been the case, then obviously I would have consulted straight away with managers.
Now, I think you've already told us that you were given some guidance on how far you could involve yourself in the private lives of others. Is that right?
Yes, and yes.
And you've told us that there was never any explicit discussion with anyone. Do I understand you correctly? Explicit discussion with anyone about the potential for a sexual encounter or relationship and how to manage that?
No, I don't recall specific about sexual encounters or sexual relationships or even approaching those things. The conversations were always about the depth of my acquaintance or friendship, if that's the right word. That was the extent of it.
Do you consider that there was any conceivable justification for an undercover officer entering into a sexual relationship with a member of their target group whilst deployed?
No, I don't personally know.
What, in your view, would be the problem with that occurring?
Well, obviously the impact upon others' lives, of a particular, particularly private aspect of somebody's life. The other problems, of course, is it would engage the UC officer into a relationship of which he wouldn't be or she wouldn't be properly in control of your activities and the home life that you had to go to at the end of your working day, as it were. So I think the impact was both on the person with whom that sexual relationship, is being suggested, but also upon the impact upon your own family and your own self.
At the time of your deployment, so far as you are aware, and I appreciate that your evidence thus far is that this is a topic that wasn't really spoken about, but were you aware of any attitude by your undercover colleagues to the possibility of engaging in a sexual encounter or relationship?
I don't recall conversations on the matters. Really don't.
If I ask the same question about your managers, can you assist? Did you get any impression as to what their attitude might be to something like that?
Well, I get the impression it was something to be avoided at all costs. That would have been their attitude, I would have expected. It was just not to be done.
Was there any gossip about anybody engaging in sexual encounters or relationships whilst in the field during your time on the SCS?
No, I don't recall any.
Your service as an STS undercover officer overlapped with that of John Dines, Andy Coles, Bob Landert, officer that we know in the inquiry by the cipher HN1, HN87, and Trevor Morris, amongst others. Now, if you want to just refresh your memory, be careful about names, please. You can look up HN1, HN87, and just remind yourself as to who they were.
Yes, my deployment overlapped with them.
Yeah. And other than Andy Coles, all of those former undercover officers have accepted either being engaged in a sexual relationship or having had a sexual encounter whilst deployed. Are you aware of that?
I was aware of some of those names.
And I think Andy Cole's subject of an allegation that he had a sexual relationship but doesn't make any admission in relation to that. Are you aware of his position or not?
Not exactly, no.
Whilst on the STS, were you aware of any of your contemporaries having been involved in sexual relationships or encounters in their cover identities whilst deployed?
No.
Now, HN90, these aren't just one or two examples, but a number of your contemporaries and colleagues who engage in this sort of conduct. Are you sure that this sort of activity was not known about by you?
I am certain.
Are you sure, or can you assist whether this sort of activity was known about by others within the unit?
No, I wasn't aware of any of this activity or even hints of it by others.
You told us that the impression that you got that your managers would have been alive to the risk of the possibility of sexual engagement whilst in the field. Is that right?
Yes, I'm certain they would have been.
Is it fair to say that the risks of sending men alone into the field was probably obvious?
Yes.
Now, I think in your witness statement you explain that you became aware of some of your former colleagues' relationships or encounters when stories broke in the press or when you were told about them in the process of engaging with the inquiry. Is that right?
That's right, yes, the press reporting.
How do you feel about the fact that amongst those that you served with, there were undercover officers who had sexual encounters or entered into sexual relationships with members of the public whilst deployed?
Complete shock, frankly. It was the Sunday Times article I read, and that was the first inkling I got of anything. It was quite an in-depth article, and at first I just sort of couldn't believe what I was reading, especially as I had been deployed at the same time as some of them.
How do you feel about the fact that this conduct occurred under the auspices of the STS and doesn't seem to have been controlled or prevented by the STS?
Well, yes, it's a complete. Well, as I said, I can only repeat that word, but a complete shock. And I think it was not. I was just hugely disappointed that our unit was now being tainted by these, by these activities. That's the word I think I would say. I felt personally tainted because I'd been on that unit, and that's what some of the officers had at that time allegedly been done. But obviously, as time has progressed, more reporting has confirmed it.
So you felt personally tainted?
Yeah, I did, yes.
What about the women affected? Do you have any view in relation to them?
Well, I can't imagine, the devastation it must have been to think that you'd obviously been in an intimate relationship, let alone a sexual one, but even an intimate relationship, a close intimate relationship would have upon them. And especially as we now know, there's obviously, birth in the case of one.
Yes. Now, moving on to that one, Bob Lambert, I just want to ask you about something you said. I'm not going to bring the document up, but if you need it for assistance, just say so and I will. But for the record, MPS 0721977 at B47 of the hard copy bundle. And you were interviewed by officers from Operation Hearn. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Back in January 2014. Do you remember?
Yes, I do.
Operation Hearn being the police's investigation into the SDS, is that right?
That's correct.
And do you remember during the course of that interview saying that management was wrapped round Bob Lambert and would quite often sit down with him after the main meeting and be seen in discussion with him?
Yes, I remember that, yes.
Can you explain what you mean by management being wrapped round Bob Lambert?
Well, we would have those round-robin meetings, as I'd explained, where you pretty much put onto the table what you were doing, what you'd been up to, what you proposed to do. And after that, those meetings, occasionally an officer would be taken into a side room by one, maybe two of the managers for some further discussion, shall we say, that perhaps didn't affect anyone else. And it may have been things that perhaps we shouldn't have been party to, like deployments around specific organisations. And at that time, I felt that, at least it was noticeable to me, that really every one of those meetings for possibly a couple of weeks, Bob Lambert was in long discussions long after the general round robin, shall we say, the more open part of the meeting.
Did you get the impression that management were particularly close to Bob Lambert?
Yes, I think they were very close to his activities. Yeah, that's what I felt.
Can I ask you be shown a document? It's UCPI 19959, which is at C162 of the hard copy bundle. Now, this is an intelligence report that details an SWP week-long event called Marxism 92. And we'll get to the fact that you were deployed into the SWP in due course, all right? Can I ask that we turn up page 34, please, so straight to page 34. And this is part of a list of individuals that were identified at that SWP event. And one of those individuals is recorded there as B, which is an inquiry cipher. All right? So please be careful about names. Please make sure you don't utter the real name. You were reminded this morning, I think, of two names that B was known by. Do you remember being reminded?
Yes, I do.
Do you have any recollection of B?
No, none whatsoever.
Can you remember whether she was particularly on your radar at this stage?
No, not at all.
Now, B was, by the time of this report, a woman that your colleague Trevor Morris had commenced a sexual relationship with. Were you aware of this at the time?
No, I wasn't. No.
Sir, is that a convenient moment?
Yes, certainly. We'll break now for 15 minutes to enable the transcriber to have a rest.
HN90, before the break, I was asking you about the subject of sexual relationships, and something I think you told us was that you were conscious or aware that your managers were aware that there was a risk to you of this being a possibility. How were you aware that there was a risk to you?
Not specifically to me, but to us as officers.
You told us that you weren't exactly sure of Andy Coles's position in relation to the allegation that he had a sexual relationship whilst undercover. What do you mean by not exactly?
Well, I don't know even now, I don't know what the reporting is regarding him.
By reporting, do you mean press reporting?
Yes, but, I don't know what the situation is with him.
I see. And you told us that your impression was that relationships were to be avoided at all costs. What gave you that impression?
Because the conversation I've been having about fieldcraft, as it were, was the relationship between you and the people you were deployed against, if I can use that word, against. But it was that relationship and how close you would become in terms of what strayed into beyond an acquaintanceship and became a friendship, to the point, shall we say, where perhaps you might be invited into a home, somebody's home. So for me, in those conversations, an intimate or a sexual relationship was just so far down the line that we weren't discussing that specifically, because it was just beyond, where I was trying to find that line in the sand.
I see. Now, did you receive any guidance or training whilst on the STS on racial equality or racism?
I don't recall any, but during the Metropolitan Police, during that time within the Metropolitan Police, there was material going around, and I would have received some of that, I'm sure, as packages coming out for the bi-weekly meetings.
Is that written material?
Yes, written packages, yeah.
Did you witness or hear about any racist or racially discriminatory conduct whilst serving on the SDS or with Special Branch or with the police?
I don't recall any, but I'm sure that some of it now, especially in the way that times have changed, I'm sure some of it now would be regarded as, racist material, racist talk, yes. But not at the time, per se.
Did you see anything or hear anything that you think would be regarded now as racist talk, as you term it?
No, I can't think of any incidents at all.
Your service overlapped with a black officer, Trevor Morris. Were you aware of any issues in relation to race that involved him within the SDS?
No, I wasn't.
Just want your ask that your witness statement be put up, please. It should be page 10, paragraph 30. It'll be your page 9, HN90, I think page... Oh, all right, page 9, paragraph 30, please. Just want to look at what you said there. You say, I'm asked whether I experienced any racism within the STS, MPSB or MPS during my time as a UCO. It is important for the inquiry to understand that the context now is very different from the 1980s. There was nothing that stood out to me by the standards of that time as either behaviour or language that needed to be challenged, whether it was directed at me or otherwise. That was certainly true in the SDS. The same is true of the remainder of the MPS as a whole. But as I actively avoided contact with MPSB and uniform officers during my deployment, I have very little to base this conclusion on. Even with hindsight, I was not aware of any inherent unfairness. Now, you say in your witness statement that it's important for the inquiry to understand that the context now is very different to the 1980s. Why did you feel the need to say that, in effect, it was a different time in the context of addressing racism within the police in your witness statement?
Well, I think it's just that. It was a different time. Everything from what you saw on television, what you might read in the media, and I'm certain within the police service itself. And I'm sure SDS was no different to that. But if you ask me to sort of relate any specific incidents that I can remember, then no, I can't.
Are you sure you didn't observe or hear about any racist conduct or behaviour whilst you were serving?
I don't recall any, but I am sure that there would have been something which we would now say this is racist.
And does that apply to the SDS?
I would say so, yes.
Did you receive any guidance or training about sex discrimination or gender equality whilst on the SDS?
Again, I can't recall any, but I would expect to have perhaps seen written material akin to the racism question you asked me earlier.
Can I ask that your witness statement, this time page 10, paragraph 32, please? And you say, during this period, I did not recall experiencing any sexism or gender bias. In my time, it was rare to have female officers on the unit. I cannot rule out the possibility that there may have been some sexist comments during conversations among officers, but this was not commonplace, and there was nothing that caused me or anyone else to complain that I can recall. The female UCO were robust individuals who would not have hesitated to call out behaviour that they did not appreciate. Now, what makes you unable to rule out the possibility that there may have been some sexist comments made during your time?
I think it goes for the same as the racism. You know, it was of a different time, and again, things that were acceptable on television or the media now would not be. Then would not be acceptable now. So it's more my conjecture, really, just thinking back to those times being different.
Did the fact that, as you say, it was rare to have female officers on the unit lend itself to an environment where male officers could engage in sexist conduct or behaviour without any judgment or consequence?
I think that might be the case, yes. Not having females there. Yeah.
Did you witness or hear about any sexist conduct or behaviour while serving in the police force, special branch or SDS?
I don't recall any.
Are you sure, given that you're unable to rule it out?
I'm unable to rule it out, yes. I don't rule it out at all, but I can't recall conversations of that time that would now, in today's context, make me think, yes, that was completely wrong.
Now, in building your legend in preparation to deploy undercover, you used the name of a deceased child, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
You took on the cover name of Mark Kerry, is that correct?
That's correct.
And for your benefit, it's at pages 10 to 11, paragraph 5. In your witness statement, you explained that you attended St Catherine's House, the Register of Births and Deaths, in order to research an appropriate identity. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Now, again, being careful about names, fields of deployment of those you worked with, was the use of a deceased child's identity your own idea, or was the tactic one that was suggested to you or that you were instructed to use?
It was one that had been used for many years, and one that was considered the pathway, because there was very little choice to. When I say very little, it would be along the same lines, perhaps, of a birth certificate in an embassy or abroad, but basically you had to get somebody's identity to withstand scrutiny over the period of time that I was deployed.
Why do you say there was little alternative to the deceased child tactic being used?
Well, I don't know of another way that you can take an identity and for it to withstand scrutiny. If somebody starts to look into your legend, they've got to be able to find a record of your birth.
Now, you explain at paragraph 36, page 11 of your witness statement, for your benefit, that you looked into the circumstances of the child's death in order to ensure that it hadn't attracted a lot of publicity, looked at local newspapers for any press reporting into the death, and looked into the circumstances of the child's family. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, some information was on the birth certificate itself, as I recall. And I do recall, I don't know, I can't think exactly where I got it from, but I remember trying to look at the area that this incident had happened to see if there was any press reporting.
So you were looking for local press reports?
Local press reporting, yeah.
And just take care with your answer to this question if you need to. Can you remember how you looked into the circumstances of the child's family? Can you remember what sort of inquiries you made?
It was through births, marriages, deaths, research, further research at then it was St Catherine's House.
So publicly available information?
Publicly available documents, yeah.
Page 15, for your benefit of your witness statement, paragraphs 51 to 52, you tell us that you also went to the area of Farnham or Aldershot, which was the area on the birth certificate of the deceased child whose identity you used. Was going to the area a task that you undertook of your own volition, or was it something you were advised or instructed to do?
Advised to do.
Being careful about names, can you remember who advised you?
No, not specifically.
Can you remember if it was another UCO or someone in management?
No, it would have been when I was preparing my legend.
So does it follow from that that would have been somebody in management?
Yes.
Why did you visit the area of the child's birth?
It was so simply so I could familiarise myself with the locality. So if at some point I should be asked on where I was born, etc., then I would at least to be able to describe something of, where I'd been born and brought up.
How much time did you spend there?
I certainly recall one day. I may have gone down for a second day. I can't, but I'm not certain of that.
Did you ascertain the address of any family members of the child?
Yeah, yes, I did.
Did you go there?
I went to the area, yes.
Did you go to the address?
Yes. In the sense that I went into the street and I was in a vehicle.
Right. Was your visit something you did without informing anyone else, or were your managers aware?
No, they were aware of where I was going.
Did you tell them in advance?
Yes.
And did they approve of the research that you were undertaking?
Yes.
Now, you also say in your witness statement that the STS office might have spoken to Surrey Special Branch in advance to determine if the family of the deceased child had come to the notice of the local constabulary, or Surrey Special Branch may have made checks of their own records. Why do you think that the Regional Special Branch might have been involved in this process?
It's conjecture on my part. When I was interviewed for this, I seem to recall that's the kind of activity that would have gone on in my back office as well. They would have helped out on certain things and made those phone calls, perhaps in some guise or another.
Were you aware of those sorts of inquiries being undertaken in relation to anyone else?
No, I wasn't, but my conjecture would be if the officer required it, then if it was appropriate, then that would have been done.
In your experience, was it normal for a regional special branch to be tasked to make inquiries of a child's family in this way?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Being careful about names, please. Was there any particular individual who would be responsible for liaising with regional special branch or making the requests of them?
It would have been the management in back office. So again, it may have been the sergeants, or I should imagine, but it's again conjecture on my part.
Are you able to assist with this, that if such inquiries were made, would the regional special branch be informed that the reason for such inquiries was to assess the suitability of a deceased child's identity for later use?
I don't know what was said, how it was done. I would imagine it would not have been said in explicit terms.
Were any steps taken by you or your managers to ensure that any intrusion into the family as a result of inquiries being made in support of your legend were kept to what was necessary or to a minimum?
I didn't know.
What about your managers? Do you know if they
I
took
don't
any
know what
steps?
was done because I don't know specifically what they did for me and how they did it.
At the time that you were creating your legend, did you consider any impact that the use of the identity may have had on the child's family?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
What did you consider that impact might be?
Well, obviously the emotional aspect of the child's identity having been used, either with or without their consent, both aspects. I would imagine it would be distressing for them had they come to know of it.
Did you consider whether there was any risk to the deceased child's family as a result of you using the identity?
Yes, I did, yes.
What did you consider that the risk might be, or risks?
Well, I thought it was just so unlikely that they would ever get to know that I had used that identity, because there were so few connections with my legend. It was really the date of birth, the place of birth, were the only connections and only input into my legend. And I didn't regard it as something that would ever happen, frankly.
Did you consider the possibility about you being found out or compromised, and what might happen to the family if activists researched and tracked them down? Did you ever consider that possible impact?
No, I didn't.
Given that there were some impacts that did cross your mind in relation to the family of the deceased child, why did you proceed with the use of the identity?
Sorry, why? Could you repeat the question?
Given that you accept there may have been some emotional impact on the family, or there may have been some risk, why did you proceed with the use of the deceased child's identity?
Because I think the risk was absolutely so small, and as I said, to my own mind, it was something that would never happen. That they would find out the child's identity had been used in this way. And on the other side of the balance, I had, obviously, my identity, my legend to protect. And as I saw it, it was was common practice for all and many before me that was the only way you could do it, was by taking an identity that's already in the registers.
Was there any reason that or did you consider trying to work out whether there are any viable alternatives to this tactic?
I didn't know.
Was there any reason why you didn't?
Well, I just think everyone thought there is no other way.
At the time, were you comfortable with the use of this tactic?
I was, after I'd considered to myself that, namely, the risk, if you like, of the family finding out was just negligible. It just wouldn't happen. At that point, then yes, I was comfortable with it.
Does that follow that there was a time where you were not comfortable with it?
No, there wasn't a time when I wasn't comfortable with it. It's just that there was that question in my mind, what if? And then I considered, well, what are the chances then? Where are we on the scale of risk?
Did you ever challenge your managers about the use of the tactic and suggest that there may be, or they look into viable alternatives?
No, I didn't suggest that at all. It was accepted by me, and I believe colleagues around me, that this was the only way to do it.
Looking back, how do you feel now about the use of the identity of a deceased child?
On retrospect, well, it's because now we have an inquiry, and the what has come to light in the years gone by, then obviously I don't feel good about it. I don't know if the family, if any remain, have had any knowledge of this at all. But it's only in retrospect. At the time, I felt comfortable with it.
Did your managers undertake any due diligence or testing of your cover identity to see if it would withstand scrutiny?
This was done really as I'm building my legend. I discussed where I am, and they then suggest other things that can be done to support, because obviously a single inquiry to a register might not be the route taken, but somebody might, wishing to check me, go into, shall we say, other government records and start looking for me elsewhere, depending on their access.
Do you know whether, other than that, they made their own independent inquiries of the identity to satisfy themselves as to whether it was a viable one or not?
No, I don't think so, no.
Now, I think you addressed this for your benefit at page 16, paragraph 56 of your witness statement. But it's right that part of your work in the STS back office included helping with intelligence reports that were prepared by undercover officers. Is that right?
That's correct.
And as a result of this role, did you come to understand who the consumers of STS intelligence were?
Yes, I did.
Where were reports going?
There were two main areas of business. One was to Metropolitan Police Special Branch for dissemination to the relevant squads there. And the second other main customer was the security service.
Who had overall editorial control of the reports that you were producing?
It would have been the management of the SDS.
Would they alter or amend reports?
I'm sure they would have done. And I think that comes from my knowledge where earlier you referred to my reports containing tittle-tattle. So sometimes that was taken out and I'd be told about it.
Can you think of any other examples of how an intelligence report or how intelligence provided by you may not appear in the same way in its final form?
No, I'm not. Well, other than possibly telephone conversations between the customer and the back office.
Were you paid overtime in your role as an STS undercover officer?
Yes, I was.
Did overtime make any difference to your pay?
Yes, it was substantial.
Was anything said to you about opportunities to work overtime during your recruitment into the SDS?
During my no. It was said that obviously I'd be working extremely long hours, for which overtime would be paid, but I didn't go into the impact that it would have upon my my final salaries and my monthly pay.
Did anyone ever suggest to you that you'd be better off financially as an STS UCO than you were as you had been before?
Well, yes, at the initial meeting, where I was spoken to by Mr. Docker and HN 109, it was noted to me there that obviously the overtime would be substantial and the requirement upon my time was going to be substantial, and it wouldn't be a case of I'd pass the work on to somebody else. So it would be a case of if it needed to be done, I'd be expected to do it.
Was the opportunity to earn overtime or the potential for increased earnings, was that something that attracted you to the undercover role?
No, it wasn't.
Were you aware, were there any other undercover officers took into account the potential to earn more when deciding whether to take the role?
No, I don't. It was the nature of the work that always appealed.
Are you saying that applied to your contemporaries as well as yourself?
I think so, yes.
Never heard anyone talk about how much better off they were?
Oh, well, yes, we were all better off. We knew that, and
Right.
so we knew that we were far better off. But to me, I don't think I ever came across somebody that was motivated by it.
I see.
Because I think the impact upon your personal lives and your career was frankly not worth the money for however long you were deployed.
Now, during your deployment, I think a cap on overtime was imposed. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
What was the reaction to that?
The reaction of the
Forgive me,
UCO.
the reaction of the undercover officers, yes.
Yeah. Well, I think it wasn't disappointment at the money, as it were, capping the money. I think it was the disappointment that perhaps we were going to have to somehow sort of work our jobs and our deployment to fit into an overtime cap, rather than do things as we felt were necessary.
Did the cap affect the morale of the undercover officers that were deployed at the time?
I think affecting the morale probably is going too far.
What impact did it have then?
I think people were cheesed off, if I can put it that terms.
And are you aware as to whether the cap had any impact on recruitment or adverse impact on recruitment into the SDS?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Did it have any impact on your productivity whilst in the field?
It didn't to me, no.
Did you ever work to constrained hours because of the cap?
I think there may have been occasions where obviously I was working more than the cap allowed, but there we are.
Do you know if this change impacted on the productivity of anyone else?
I'm not aware of it, no.
Was anything said to you by management about keeping productivity as it was following this change?
No, I think people produced what they could produce. It didn't, to my knowledge, impact upon that.
Now, for your benefit, this is at pages 17 to 18 of your witness statement, paragraphs 59 to 60. Again, being careful about names, please, HN 90. Can you remember who was responsible for your initial tasking before you deployed?
Well, it was a combination of Mr. Docker and HN 109.
Was there a specific group that you were lined up to infiltrate?
There was, yes.
And that group was, please?
Well, it was the Revolutionary Communist Group via the City of London Anti-Apartheid Group.
Do you know why the Revolutionary Communist Group was chosen for you?
I understand that that would have been a conversation between Special Branch and the Security Service.
What was your understanding of the nature of the group before you deployed?
I saw them as a revolutionary communist group. Well, sorry, by the very nature of its name.
They did what it said on the tin.
It does what it says on the tin. I regarded them, what I'd learned is that they were a subversive organisation who were out to infiltrate unions, government, any way which they could to bring around, well, the fall of democratic process as we know it.
What was your understanding of subversive?
Subversive?
Yes. Or
It's
subversion, rather.
Subversion. Subversion is the activity to bring about an undemocratic change in government.
Did you have any training or guidance of the topic of subversion before you deployed?
During my time on my previous deployment, my previous squad before joining Special Demonstration Squad, I got that information from
But not whilst on the Special Demonstration Squad?
Yeah.
And you told us that the infiltration was due to be via the City of London Anti-Apartheid Group, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Why was it considered that you were unable to infiltrate the RCG, the Revolutionary Communist Group, directly?
Because they were a very closed, tight group. They used cover names amongst themselves, and easy access, such as walking up and saying, "I'd like to join," was not the way that you could get into that group. Whereas the City of London Anti-Apartheid Group was very much a front organisation, as we regarded it at the time, of the Revolutionary Communist Group. And so access to something at a lower level, which was all public order related, around the anti-apartheid long-term protest outside South Africa House in relation to particularly the imprisonment of Nelson Mandela. To involve myself there might, if you like, get me talent spotted or in time approached to join the Revolutionary Communist Group.
Talent spotted, you mean by the group?
By the group, yeah.
All right, well, we'll talk about the public order implications of the City of London Anti-Apartheid Group, or CLAG, I'll call them as
CLAG,
shorthand, in due course. But I think it's right, you say in terms in your witness statement as paragraph 63, which is at page 18, you deployed into the field in September 1988, is that right?
That's right.
Can we look at, please, document UCPI 31259, which is at C1 of the hard copy bundle. This is one of your earliest intelligence reports, and we can see from paragraph 2 that it relates to the opening of something called the Pathfinder Bookshop in the SE1 postal area of London. Could you explain, please, as to how you came to be reporting on the opening of this bookshop?
In the early stages of my deployment, it would have done well for me to have got experience of mixing with other groups, even though they weren't my target group ultimately. And if you like, to get onto the scene, as it were, if you like, of extreme and left extreme revolutionary politics. I saw this bookshop was advertised to be opened, and I thought it would be a good meeting to go along to for my own education as well within my field.
When you say mixing with other groups, did you see this bookshop then as some sort of hub for like-minded groups?
No, I didn't at the time, but very soon afterwards I realised that there was another group probably behind it.
Let's see. And that group was?
That was, sorry, I need to refer to my notes.
Take your time.
I'm sorry, it escapes me at the moment.
All right. Well, let's look at another report. UCPI 10157, please, which is at tab C20. This is a report dated the 21st of February 1989, which relates to a group called the Communist League. And I'll just read out what it says at paragraph 2. The Communist League has been taking a close political interest in the February by-election at Pontypridd, Mid Glamorgan. The organisation had been seriously considering putting forward a candidate, but felt that they were not quite prepared on this occasion. How did you come to report on the Communist League?
Through its connection with the Pathfinder bookshop. Sorry, that was the name that I was struggling to recall.
And is there a reason why you reported on that group?
Because I believed it was one that was probably of interest to the security service.
What made you think it might be of interest?
Because I regarded it as a subversive organisation.
Could we look at 10178, please? UCPI 10178. It's tab C30 of the hard copy bundle. And paragraph 2 reads that the Communist League intends to put forward Privacy, known as Privacy, a prominent CL member, as its candidate for the London South Inner constituency in the forthcoming European Parliament elections on the 15th of June 1989. Her agent will be Privacy, another leading CL, or Communist League member. Now, would you agree that those reports both represent examples of the Communist League engaging with the democratic process as opposed to attempting to subvert it?
Well, I think it's the, it's the way entryist organisations operate. So whilst that might appear to be engaging with it, it's a matter of getting inside, as it were.
Just looking back and considering the content of those two reports, do you think that the assessment of the Communist League as a subversive group by you was a fair one?
I believed it was, yes.
10078, please. UCPI 10078, which is at C2 of the hard copy bundle. This report is dated the 27th of October 1988, and it relates, we can see at paragraph 2, to a meeting held by the group Workers' Power. And I think this is another one of your early reports. What sort of group was Workers' Power?
Again, I believe it was a revolutionary communist organisation. Believed in revolution by undemocratic means.
How did you come to report on this group?
I believe I went to a meeting. I picked up a flyer somewhere and decided again to go to the meeting, part of, again, cutting my teeth.
Why did you consider that it was a group that merited reporting on?
Because I believed that it was an organisation that would be of interest to the security service because of its revolutionary aims.
Can we just look at something? I won't bring it up, but perhaps you can turn it up for yourself. Page 33 of your witness statement, paragraph 106, please. and there you say, in my view, Workers' Power was a subversive organisation, but it was a low public order threat because while it frequently attended demonstrations, it could not mobilise many people. It was not involved in criminality, as far as I'm aware. In hindsight, do you consider that reporting on that group was justifiable, given that realistically, in your view, it was a group that was incapable of mobilising many people?
I think from a special branch perspective, yes, it was not something that was of particular interest to us, other than to service possibly a requirement of the security service.
So I'm moving on to the City of London Anti-Apartheid Group. Would that be a convenient moment?
Certainly. We will resume at 3 minutes to 2.